My name is Dirk. I don't remember when I fell in love with Maribeth, but it was sometime during my senior year in high school. I was 17. We spent endless days together, driving aimlessly with the windows down in the old Buick, ballroom dancing, laughing at private jokes, going to the drive-in movies they still had back then, and sharing dreams as vast as the horizon. Maribeth had a way of making the world brighter. Her laughter was infectious. She was a dancer, and her energy was boundless. The girl was beautiful in an effortless way, with her brownish auburn hair and sparkling yet intense eyes that transmitted an indescribable something unique and impeccable. No one had ever looked at me with eyes that spoke love as loudly and directly. No one has since. Her eyes were unique. Maribeth, my first true love, was the ultimate 16-year-old temptress. She was the object of every fantasy I ever had, a helium love balloon that lifted my soul. I was in awe of her, and she intimidated me. I feared I was not good enough for her. It wasn't just her beauty, although that had a lot to do with it. The 5'4", 110-pound Maribeth had the hard-body active dancer. Her perfectly sculpted smooth muscles reminded me of the Greek goddess Hera. Maribeth thought her tits were too small, a common issue with dancers. I thought they were beautiful and told her beauty is in the mouth of the beholder. A joke she didn't find funny. When she spoke about life, it was with passion and clarity, making everything else dull. She was articulate, witty, and had an uncanny ability to make me special. I was incredibly fortunate to be the one she chose to be her fiancé. To protect her was among my masculine jobs. She trusted me not to hurt her, physically or psychologically. I was happy that someone beyond my dog felt that way about me. Maribeth had such radiance it was like being touched by the sun. When I could make her smile, I commanded the world. But as the third winter moved to spring, a nagging doubt began to creep into my mind. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something felt off. We were at college and went home for Christmas break. The future, which had been so clear, certain, and full of promise for 3 years, became uncertain after New Year's Day. Maribeth had changed during the break. Perhaps not changed. Maybe she woke up from some kind of dream, and what we had wasn't enough. I was not good enough for her. Was that the problem? I wasn't a good student. She was on the honor roll. Sitting alone, I began questioning our relationship, wondering if we were really meant to be together, or if the magic of my first true love made everything perfect. I knew most high school relationships don't last. Most first loves don't work out. Few people in my high school class who had married were still married 3 years later. But since the first of the year, she ignored me, saying that her change of majors required a lot more study. She was choosing school over me. Or was my glow fading in her eyes? I had chosen her over everything. One afternoon, I told her I'd been thinking a lot and thought we needed some time apart. Maribeth turned to me, her expression a mixture of surprise and hurt, and asked, "Are you breaking up with me?" I hesitated, hating the pain that filled my soul, and said, "I think we need to take a break. I need to figure things out." The days that followed were a blur of regret and second-guessing. I missed Maribeth terribly. I was not convinced I had made the right decision. But no matter how hard I tried to move on, thoughts of Maribeth kept intruding. Her laughter haunted me, her smile and the absence of those penetrating, loving eyes possessed by no other woman in the world were constant reminders of what I had lost. A month later, in a moment of clarity, I realized I had made a terrible mistake. I'd lost the person I worried about, cared about, and loved. I loved Maribeth, and I wanted her back. I went to her dorm with a heart full of hope and a plan to win her. She wasn't out on a date, I was told. I had not dated, but Maribeth had already moved on. She was dating someone else. She had time for a date with somebody else, but no time for me. I was devastated. I called her. She refused my calls. I sent her notes. No response. Finally, in complete desperation, I placed a display ad in the university newspaper that said, "Dirk loves Maribeth." Everyone saw it. The city newspaper gossip column mentioned it. Surely she had to respond. She had to call me. She must, and I was confident she would. The trumpets would blare, and she would run to me with open arms. We belonged together in every sense. But reality isn't a romantic movie. She never called. No more us. Every day, I woke up with this stupid flicker of hope in my chest. The hope that today she might come back. I didn't know I could be this sad, this unhappy, or for so long. I had squandered my opportunity. Replacing her was not possible. She was in an irreplaceable class by herself. I read Khalil Gibran. Think not that you can direct the course of love, for love, if it finds you worthy, directs your course. Love had found me unworthy. My heart wasn't merely broken. I believed it was irreversibly silenced. Love was too cruel to ever succumb again. Somehow I had to move on and leave Maribeth behind. I graduated, and so did she. I married a woman I didn't love to avoid the military draft. Yes, the Maribeth wound tragically remained open. I couldn't shake her memory. She was my first true love, and I always imagined what might have been if I hadn't let my fears and doubts get the better of me. I finally gave up trying to make my loveless, miserable marriage work and got a divorce. I call them my tragic years. 3 years later, I remarried, this time for love, my second true love. Decades later, I attended a high school reunion of all graduates who had graduated at least 50 years before. Graduates only, no guests. I was assigned to place 7, table B. I mingled with old friends, exchanging stories about those who had passed, and catching up on lost time. The lights flickered, indicating it was time to take our seats. The tables seated 10 except table B. It sat only 8, and place 8, the one next to me, was missing a chair. The place setting was there, but no chair. I shrugged and introduced myself to the other 6, who were already seated, chatting. Behind me, I overheard a familiar voice, different yet familiar. Turning around, I was stunned to see Maribeth, in a wheelchair. A painful reawakening of the void she'd left rushed through my head. My breath vanished as an unseen fist squeezed my heart, making my blood pressure drop 20 points. I couldn't breathe and became lightheaded. Yes, I was the one who broke up. It wasn't because I didn't love her. Loving her consumed me, and I needed affirmative proof of her love. To hear simple words such as, "I love you," words to overcome the sense that I ceased to exist to her. I instigated the break, but she was the one who never answered my pleas. Here she was at the reunion. Indeed, it was Maribeth, but not the same Maribeth. Gone was the stylish, vibrant young woman who lived in a leotard and danced, the one who had captured my heart and soul all those years ago. In her place was a woman who was more than twice the weight. A round, full face replaced the sculptured classic Greek profile I remembered, complete with soft, plump cheeks that generously curved outward and joined a well-filled drooping chin. The skin, though smooth, bore the redness of excessive rose blush makeup old women too often use. It did not hide the tired, worn-out expression she tried to cover with a forced smile as she spoke with classmates as she rolled past their table. I was speechless as I took her in. Maribeth's neck-length hair was now brushed up with a wig stacked on her head, in a 1960s beehive-type style. She wore a purple muumuu-type tent dress with generous sleeves to cover arms the size of what her muscled thighs used to be. The material had a god-awful flower print to complete the picture of a drab, dowdy, old-fashioned, knick-knack collecting great-grandmother. A frump. I thought back to the dresses she wore to the 2 proms, mine and hers. Her once sparkling eyes, unique eyes, the eyes she used to look at me like no eyes ever did before or since. Eyes capable of turning stone into a lava of love. Eyes I had dreamed about for hundreds of nights. Eyes now half closed from the weight of puffy lids. Our eyes met, and she motored toward me, heading for place 8. I caught a whiff of something pungent, acrid, and sour as she approached. Body odor. Was it Maribeth? No, never. She had been meticulously clean. It was a scent I encountered only around the obese who were too indifferent to get soap and water between their folds of flab. She stopped the wheelchair at my side. She was the source and my table-mate. "Hi, Dirk," she said, her high-pitched voice, friendly, but without the love and enthusiasm I remembered and a smile I could not interpret. Maribeth, I replied, forcing a smile. It's been a long time. We exchanged pleasantries. Silence settled lightly around us, as if the din from the group was turned down, and I could hear only her. Maribeth spoke of her life and complained about her health. She told me every disease, condition, and organ failure she had suffered, was suffering and would suffer in the future. I was almost a medical encyclopedia, nearly all traceable to obesity and, oddly, to dancing. I ran my eyes over her again. She tracked my gaze and jokingly volunteered that her husband is supportive and says she's not fat. He calls her fluffy. I frowned. Such obesity did not happen overnight. A husband who did not acknowledge more than doubling her weight as a problem was not a supporter. He was an enabler. I listened politely, but with a mixture of empathy, disappointment, and relief. Empathy and disappointment for how she turned out and has lived since our split. Relief that I was not her husband. Fluffy, the woman sitting in a wheelchair with an oxygen bottle strapped to it and breathing through a nasal cannula, did not resemble the Maribeth I had loved. What the hell happened? Yes, I had loved her. It wasn't a fling, it wasn't a teenage crush. It lasted 3 years. And it wasn't because she was the first woman I ever made love to. My love was real, and she threw it away because I meant nothing to her, or she would have answered my calls and notes. For sure, at least my ad. I suspect my voice tonight may have contained some bitterness. I spent 3 years with Maribeth as a couple, her fiancé, and untold time pining for her afterward, idealizing her in my mind beyond the ideal she actually was, and regretting the decision to break up. With me, she would have had tough love. If we had remained a couple, she would not have come to this. Or would she? Maribeth looked up at me from her wheelchair, her face sad, a tear flooding one eye, and softly said, "When I learned you were attending, I asked to be seated next to you. I want to tell you something." Her lips twitched. I saw words were already on her tongue, prying her lips apart. First, I know I would not be in the physical and mental condition I am now if we had married. Look at you. You're the same weight as in high school. I would be, too. You were my protector and you loved me too much to let me deteriorate the way I have. You're the only one I ever met who consistently did and said what you thought was right, not just popular or acceptable. It was one of the many features about you I loved. I was perplexed. If this is what she thinks, then why did she give me the silent treatment those decades ago when I bared my soul to the world and would do anything to regain her love? Fluffy Maribeth, I started, and she held up a hand, softly stopping me. The second and last thing I want to tell you is I was wrong. I loved you and thought our love so strong there was no need for words. In that sense, I was taking you for granted when I spent all that extra time on studies and dance. You did need words, and I didn't recognize that. Fluffy drew in a deep breath, and her eyes looked at her feet, then raised her head to make eye contact. When you tried to make amends, I was angry, enraged. I saw your notes and the ad. I cut it out from my scrapbook and still have it. I gave you the silent treatment to get even, to teach you a lesson for breaking up. She paused and shook her head. Letting you go was the worst decision I ever made. It was revenge. Revenge is a dish best served cold. But I was hot with anger that you broke up with me. Revenge cost me you. Cost us. My mind went to the classic movie Gone with the Wind, where Rhett Butler gave up on Scarlett after doing all he could to attract her. She treated him like dirt, with no respect or love. Finally, too late, she tells him she truly loves him. Maribeth, I said in as quiet and somber voice as I could muster. It's a pity I did not hear this back then. I had loved her so much, and she had shattered my heart so severely it took more than 10 years to heal. Different words came to mind, words of Rhett Butler, and I silently said, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn." Next story, it was a Tuesday afternoon when Lila, our new Pilates instructor, walked into the gym with a ghost from my past behind her. I stood behind the gym's counter, wiping sweat from my forehead after my afternoon strength training, and flashed my most dazzling smile. My face froze when I noticed the girl with brown skin and thick-rimmed glasses behind her. Nina Suarez. Lila waved and the corners of Nina's mouth quirked upward in a polite acknowledgement of my presence. but her eyes did not light up, her smile did not widen. She followed behind Lila to the wood floor classroom, tossing her thick hair over her shoulder. She didn't recognize me, but no one from high school would recognize me now, unless they were my friend on social media. The scrawny class president with glasses and terrible haircut was long gone. I busied myself with wiping down the gym equipment, trying to ignore the strange feeling in my chest as the bass of cheerful pop music leaked through the doors. Eventually, the class ended, and the two women approached the desk. I strode over, tossing a towel over my shoulder. "Good class." "Hi, Archie." "Yeah, lots of good energy today," said Lila. "Can you log my timesheet?" "No problem." I stepped behind the desk and clicked around the computer, shooting a glance past Lila's shoulder. "Hey, Nina Suarez. Long time no see." I had always called her by her first and last name in high school, ever since we were partners for a project in AP history class our sophomore year. She pushed her glasses up her sweaty nose as her eyes grew wide. "Archibald Green?" I placed my forearms on the counter, adopting a pose of ease even as my heartbeat increased. "The one and only. You're back in town." She adjusted her gym bag, giving me time to admire her post-workout glow. "Yeah, Lila's my roommate. She convinced me to try her class. What she did not tell me was that I wouldn't be able to feel my legs after, or arms." She glowered at Lila, who shrugged. "You'll thank me later." Lila waved and headed out the door, her blonde ponytail swinging with every step. The gym was quiet, so I kept the conversation rolling. "What are you up to nowadays?" "I just bought the sweetest little bookstore. I'm opening in a few weeks. I'll have to stop by." She grinned. "And you? You're working here?" "Yeah, my buddy Nate owns the place. I teach boot camp classes." Her eyes flicked to the black and white photos behind the counter, a collection of the staff and their fitness accolades. "Hang on, is that you?" She stared at the photo of me in board shorts, flexing on a stage and wearing a medal. "Men's Physique Champ of 2019. "What's that?" "A bodybuilding competition. It's for guys who don't want to go full Arnold in their training." "Wow, it's good exercise." She ran her eyes over my arms, the fabric of my t-shirt pulled tightly against my biceps. "Clearly." Then she blushed and pulled out her phone. Before I could ask if she wanted to grab dinner this weekend, she was leaving. "Sorry, I'm running late. I'm meeting my contractor soon. I'll see you later." I watched her walk out into the sunny parking lot, passing under palm trees, and wondered why my limbs felt so tingly. Hashtag if there was one thing that I learned in college, it was that girls didn't like nerds. They liked guys with big muscles who could toss them around the bedroom, even if I still felt like the quiet, studious kid from high school. I also learned that, with the right tricks and confidence, I could pull any girl I wanted. The next time I saw Nina's name pop up on the pre-registrations for Pilates, I made sure I was in position. I did my warm-up, stretching thoroughly. I was going for a new personal best on my Olympic lift today, a classic ploy to impress. I waited until 3:50, knowing that Nina and Lila would be the last two to leave class, then called Nate over to be my spotter. A bunch of people paused their workouts to watch. With the small crowd at my back, I concentrated on my form. I envisioned my success as my hands wrapped around the metal bar. I lifted, clenching my core. The weight soared. My quads screamed as I held the bar over my head in my squat position, then forced myself to stand upright, completing the clean. Grunting with effort, I let the 270-pound barbell fall to the ground where it hit the rubber turf with a clang. Nate hooped, and the rest of my audience cheered. I looked past them and saw Nina at the counter. She smiled as she shook her head, then walked out of the gym. Since she was unmoved by my performance, I tried other tactics. I brought Nina protein shakes, gave her a free class pass, which she politely refused, and finally resorted to asking Lila about her. She was single, but other than that I didn't get more than, "She's really busy getting ready to open her store." I begged Lila to ask Nina about me. She rolled her eyes. "You know her better than I do. Maybe try doing something she likes." Then she waltzed into the classroom, leaving me to spiral behind the desk. Hashtag 2 weeks went by, and when Nina still hadn't accepted my friend request on Instagram, I knew I had to do something drastic. So, when I saw her name on the list for Pilates, I clicked my name into the roster and sealed my fate, taking Lila's advice. I spread one of the gym's yoga mats next to Nina and sat down. She raised an eyebrow at me. Trying something new today, Archibald Green? Thought I would give it a whirl. She smirked. Too bad all those muscles can't save you from the pain you're about to endure. I could handle a few mat exercises. At Lila's instruction, I grabbed a pair of measly 8-pound dumbbells and strapped on some ankle weights, loading them up fully and ignoring her recommendation to go lighter for my first class. To my chagrin, it turned out that Pilates is really fucking hard. 15 minutes into class, I was sweating so much I had to keep wiping down my mat. I made a mental note to make Nate buy the nice, grippy kind that Nina had brought with her. She didn't slide around hers at all. We also didn't drop our weights once, and soon those 8-pound weights felt like 60. After our warm-up, we moved to the reformers, machines that looked suspiciously like medieval torture racks. I lay down on my sliding platform and grabbed the straps. Halfway through class, we held our feet in the hair in a boat pose, pulsing our arms up and down at our sides. The amount of shaking that was happening throughout my torso could have registered on the Richter scale. I dared to look at Nina, who was perfectly at ease in her pose, though her hair was plastered adorably to her forehead with sweat. She caught my eye and pinched her lips together, stifling a laugh. "We're coming into our final set here, folks," chirped Lila with 8 minutes left of class. "Remember, breath to movement." She took her place on her own reformer. "If you would like to level up, I invite you to join me in some advanced technique." She placed her hands behind her head and stuck one foot onto the sliding platform, bracing the other against the wooden structure. "Who's ready to burn their legs?" The class chuckled. Some did not opt for the advanced forms, but I was no quitter. I stuck my foot onto the slider and braced my hands behind my head, noting that Nina did the same. With the strength of her legs, Lila demonstrated how to glide the platform out a few inches until she was doing a sort of split, then slid in again. Every inch of me was slick with sweat. I inhaled deeply, trying to focus. If I could get through this class, then Nina had to talk to me again. This time I would ask her out. I inched the slider forward ever so slightly, but my foot shot forward off the platform, greased up from my own perspiration, and I blacked out as pain ripped through my quad. Hashtag back out in the lobby. Nina sat with me as I clutched an ice pack to my thigh. The triumph of talking to her again was buried under waves of pain and embarrassment. Nate clapped me on the shoulder as he walked by with his car keys. We were headed straight for the walk-in clinic. "Are you sure you don't need anything else?" asked Nina, placing a water bottle on the table in front of me and tucking a book back into her gym bag. "Nah, I'll be fine," I winced. "I thought power lifter's new ego is the enemy. You're confusing me with a smart power lifter. I am a dumb bodybuilder, one who is desperately trying to impress a girl he likes." Jesus, what was I saying? The pain was making my tongue loose. My thoughts were hazy. I gulped from the icy-cold water bottle, hoping it would help clear my head. Nina smiled sadly. "Maybe next time you could try talking to Lila like a sane person instead of showing off in her class." "Wait, what?" A numbness that had nothing to do with the cold water settled in my gut. "If you just asked her out, you'd save yourself all this trouble." "Did you say Lila? And good for you, she's always liked the brawny ones. I still prefer more intellectual types, but it's obvious you're obsessed with her." I scrubbed my free hand over my face. "Nina Suarez. Archibald Green," she deadpanned, like she hadn't said the craziest thing I'd heard in my life. "I don't like Lila." Suddenly my face was hot, and I felt 16 again, full of self-conscious nerves. Nina squinted at me, then her mouth fell open. "Oh!" At that moment, Nate hollered at me to get a move on. Nina held the door open for me as I limped outside, embarrassment turning my insides to acid. Hashtag in the walk-in clinic. Nate asked me what the hell I'd been thinking, and I told him the whole story. How I had always had a crush on Nina, and almost asked her to prom then chickened out. How this was my last chance at dating her, and I was completely fucking it up. My mood did not improve when I heard I'd be on crutches for a month. I took a week off, stewing in what Nina had said about preferring the more intellectual types. I had shoved that part of my identity away, burying it under way and weights. It had worked so far, hadn't it? Laying on the couch and feeling sorry for myself, I flipped through Instagram. I saw a post from Nina, who'd finally accepted my request. Tonight was the grand opening of her romance-themed bookstore. With a burst of resolve, I dragged myself off the couch to make myself presentable. The bookstore swarmed with people. I maneuvered through them clumsily and grabbed a book off the shelf before limping over to where she stood behind the register, glowing with pride. She raised an eyebrow at me as her face split into a grin. Interesting choice. I glanced at the cover. A buff hockey player and a petite figure skater on an ice rink. Is it any good? Yes. Once the guy stops posturing and asks the girl of his dreams out. I smiled as warmth spread through me. Nina Suarez. Will you go out with me? Next story, Jim and Judy seemed like the ideal couple. They expressed their love for each other daily. They had been married for 20 years and had 2 kids and loved their jobs. Judy was a water lawyer who worked for the government and Jim was an architect. Jim's childhood friends lived next door. Carrie and Steve had been Jim's best friends since 7th grade. When Steve became romantically involved with Carrie, Jim would almost always accompany them on their dates. Neither Carrie nor Jim seemed to mind. In fact, they encouraged it. Once Judy came on the scene, it became a foursome. They bought houses next to each other, traveled together, and ate dinner together several times a week. Carrie had been a year behind John in architectural school and eventually joined his firm. Steve finished law school the same year as Judy but didn't meet her until years later. Dinner conversations were always interesting. Jim shared his latest project ideas with Carrie and Steve discussed cases with Judy. Both couples shared a passion for water sports and backpacking. They both had cottages in northern Ontario and often took 1 to 2 week canoe trips in Algonquin Park. The birth of their children complicated matters, but as soon as the kids reached preteen age, they accompanied their parents on all their trips. Jim and Judy's 2 children, Chad and Lisa, viewed Carrie and Steve as alternate parents. They would spend as much time at their house as theirs. Betty and Jerry, Steve and Carrie's kids, felt the same way about Jim and Judy. They were one big happy family. Judy occasionally felt like an outsider when Carrie, Jim and Steve would share memories and inside jokes from their childhood. Who was Miss Grundy? Better still, why did the black fly story from their first canoe trip elicit so much laughter? She didn't find it funny at all. Oh well, she thought, if it makes them happy. Anyway, for the most part, she appreciated the family atmosphere they had created and felt close to all of them. It was a great situation for all 4 kids. Parties at their respective houses were always festive and interesting. Architectural parties were hosted by Jim and Carrie and lawyer parties by Steve and Judy. New friends and acquaintances often confused whose spouse was whose. Carrie and Jim had an especially strong connection or chemistry that was obvious to everyone except them. Judy noticed it early in her relationship with Jim but chose to ignore it. She established a separate friendship with Steve. He seemed purposely oblivious to the connection. Judy decided not to share any concerns she may have to avoid appearing to be a paranoid, jealous wife. Jim's daily expressions of love allayed many of her fears, but they remained just below the surface. Judy's love for Jim, their marriage and their kids created an unshakable foundation. Their friendship with Carrie and Steve seemed unbreakable. These were honest, ethical, loyal, and loving people. How could she question their motives? Still, when guests mistook Carrie for Jim's spouse, it stung. It was Judy and Jim's turn to hold the annual New Year's Eve party. They invited all the usual guests. Architects and lawyers were in the majority, but there were many new faces. The kids were all in their late teens and invited friends. Carrie had become an avid tennis player and invited many members of her tennis club. Several neighbors and people they had met on world travels and camping trips rounded out the guest list. Jim and Judy's backyard was spacious and decked out with lights and heaters. It was a particularly balmy evening, and the grass was slightly moist from the previous day's rain. Carrie's heels sunk slightly into the wet ground, making her slightly unsteady. She wore her sheer sleeveless, low-cut black dress. She had maintained her lithe, athletic figure even at 45. Her hair, worn loose to her shoulders, remained black with a few streaks of gray. Judy wore more sensible flats and a cream-colored pantsuit with a maroon blouse. Her hair had turned prematurely white, and she wore it short. She was taller than Carrie and had a little fuller figure. Her high cheekbones, regal nose, and dazzling blue eyes still made heads turn. Jim wore his usual colorful Hawaiian shirt, unbuttoned to reveal his graying chest hair and bulging pectoral muscles. Years of endurance swimming kept him fit. Steve was the least fit of the three. He had developed a bit of a paunch over the last few years. An oversized white colorless shirt draped over casual white pants hid it well. His full head of graying blonde hair and boyish good looks made him look younger than his 45 years. Steve was standing in a crowd of new friends making conversation. He took occasional sips from his wine glass while regaling the group with funny backpacking stories. He waved at Carrie across the yard. A young dark-haired gentleman, dressed in an open white shirt and black pants, smiled and asked Steve, "You'd better watch it. Your wife is standing just a few feet away. No woman likes her man flirting with another woman." Steve laughed. "I'm waving at my wife, so I don't think she has anything to be jealous about." The man raised his eyebrows. "I'm confused. If that's your wife, who is the guy by her side?" Making eyes at her. "And what about that dazzling mama a few feet away I saw you laughing with a few minutes ago? You seemed really connected." "That's our good friend Judy. Her husband is the guy making eyes at her. My wife and I have been best friends since the 7th grade. The dark-haired man pursed his lips, nodded and said, "Yeah, right." Steve chuckled to himself and dismissed the comments as misplaced and maybe a little rude. He decided he'd better join Jim and Carrie. He walked over to them and put an arm around Carrie's shoulders. "Are you guys having fun?" Carrie and Jim were in the middle of a conversation with a group of lawyers. Both had been drinking rather heavily and were slightly tipsy. Carrie giggled as she stopped mid-sentence and turned to Steve. "Oh, honey. Jim and I were just sharing the black fly story with everyone. Do you remember how hot it was? We all slept on top of our sleeping bags in our underwear," Jim added. "And we all fit into that little tent." Steve smiled but couldn't resist adding, "And when we woke up, you were next to Carrie and I was next to Judy." Several of the listeners raised their eyebrows and inhaled deeply, expressing their shock. Carrie and Jim laughed and shook their heads. Jim waved his hand and tried to set everyone straight by saying, No, it's not what you think. It was dark. I got up to pee in the middle of the night and was slightly disoriented when I returned. I guess Steve had rolled over and created an open space between him and Carrie. Thinking it was my space next to Judy and my sleeping bag, I took it. We all had a great laugh in the morning. Everyone seemed satisfied with the explanation, but for the first time, Steve was rattled. The comment made by the guy earlier had opened his eyes to something he had only felt subliminally. There was always a connection between Jim and Carrie that he never had. After all, she was Jim's first girlfriend in 6th grade. Sure, they all became platonic friends and best buds, and Jim had given his blessing to his relationship with Carrie. For God's sakes, he was best man at their wedding. Still, there was always that chemistry between Carrie and Jim that he never had. He was sure Carrie loved him and Jim loved Judy, but somehow it was different. He'd always felt it but buried those feelings. He loved Carrie, Judy, and Jim and loved what they had. Why ruin it? He wasn't sure that Carrie or Jim acknowledged their chemistry to themselves, and he was certain they had never acted on it. Judy didn't seem concerned, but he couldn't believe she was as naive or as in denial as he was. The party ended uneventfully, and weeks passed. It was on a hike in the local woods that Steve had the opportunity to talk to Judy. Carrie and Jim were up ahead laughing at some inside joke, and he were several yards behind. Judy was uncharacteristically quiet and looked irritated. "What's up, Judy? You look upset." Judy looked up and smiled. "Oh, it's nothing. Okay, I've been meaning to run something by you. At the New Year's party, some guy mistook Jim for Carrie's husband. I know it's happened before, but this time it felt different. Have you ever noticed the special chemistry between them? What? Do you think they're having an affair? No, no, nothing like that. They would never. I always knew they had a special bond, but I thought our marriage would transfer a lot of that chemistry to me. I never doubted that we'd all remain friends and was happy when Jim brought you into our circle. He clearly loved you, and I thought some of that chemistry would be transferred to you. Over the past several years, I denied that their obvious chemistry still existed. Now, I'm not so sure, and it's eating at me. Judy took a few seconds to respond. It's funny that you suddenly have those feelings. Over the last few months, I felt the same way. It's been in front of our noses for at least 20 years. I don't know what took us so long to notice it. We both love our partners and love the friendship and life all four of us have created. Why ruin it? Do you think Carrie and Jim even acknowledge their chemistry and realize how it makes us feel? Maybe deep down, but I think they're afraid to admit it. They don't want to ruin what we have. Besides, I think they're both too ethical to act on their chemistry. They truly love us. So what do? Clearly, it bothers both of us. Eventually, one of us will explode or implode. Judy stopped in the middle of the path, picked up a twig, broke it, and replied, I think we're going to have a frank discussion with our partners. Steve shook his head. These guys have been my friends almost my whole life. I don't want to lose any of them, but you're right. Jim and Carrie had stopped by a pond and were skipping stones along the surface of the water and laughing. Steve and Judy approached them, and each put their arms around their respective spouses. Jim and Carrie looked up and smiled. Judy hesitated but decided she had to speak her truth. Sorry to interrupt your fun, but Steve and I have something important to discuss with you guys. The laughter ceased, and both Jim and Carrie's demeanor turned serious. Carrie was the first to speak. What's up, Judy? This is really hard for me to say. People are starting to comment on the obvious chemistry between you and Jim. I know it's always been there, and you've never acted on it. Still, it's starting to affect Steve and me. We know you love us and don't know what to do about it. Carrie's face clouded over as she responded, I don't know what you're talking about. We're all just good friends. Steve shook his head. Come on, honey. You've always had a thing for Jim since 6th grade. I know you love me, but not in the same way. Carrie looked at Jim, who shrugged. There was a pregnant silence until Jim broke it. Yeah, I guess I always felt it, but it didn't change how I felt towards you guys. I love you, Judy. Carrie and Steve, you are my best friends. All four of us have a great life. I wouldn't change a thing. Sometimes you have to control impulses to maintain the status quo and keep everyone happy. Judy turned to Jim and asked, Does that mean you are aware of the chemistry? That doesn't make me very comfortable. Of course, I am and always have been. Carrie and Steve are my best friends, and I would never want to do anything to hurt them or their relationship. Most all, I love you, Judy, and I would never hurt you. Judy looked down and shook her head. That still doesn't make me very comfortable. Carrie turned first to Judy, then Jim, then Steve before saying, I truly had no idea any of you felt this way. Sure, Jim and I have always been close, but... Steve put his hands on Carrie's shoulders and looked into his eyes. Come on, babe, you've always had a thing for Jim. I just thought you'd eventually have a bigger thing for me. Carrie started crying and mumbled, I love you, Steve. The walk back was slow and silent. No one was holding hands or touching. An emotional chasm had opened up. The next few weeks were tough. There was tension in both households. Jim could not understand why Judy wouldn't let it go. He wanted to proceed as if nothing had changed. Steve, on the other hand, was philosophical about the situation and was willing to maintain the status quo. Carrie was confused and started attending therapy. The sessions were helpful but did not resolve anything. She finally admitted to herself that she had undeniable chemistry with Jim but didn't know what to do about it. Eventually, Judy left Jim, but Steve and Carrie remained together until Steve died prematurely from a heart attack. A few years later, Jim and Carrie married.